Welcome to the K-State Insiders, your Kansas State sports show. Now, let's head into the studio.
Hello, everyone, and welcome in here to the K-State Insiders. I'm Cole Carmody, hosting the show tonight, but don't worry if you wanted to listen to Fitz ramble and rant and be typical Fitz and talk about K-State basketball, you will hear that. Fitz is here. Ryan Gilbert has returned from Utah. Brian Hanley is here. Ethan Fitzgerald is here to talk about some women's hoops. And if you look at the title of this video, it says Monday was a very bad day for K-State basketball. And we actually did a GPC live after the women's game, and we were fairly optimistic about the men. And Ryan Gilbert, you were there to witness that in person. Our optimism was wrongfully misguided.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad I wasn't the only one, right, that was wrong, because Fitz and Cole, I think we were all in agreement that was a nice bounce back spot for Kansas State. And early on, I thought the energy was fine. And then as the game slowly progressed, I know I rewatched the game here from start to finish before recording this with y'all. It just kind of got worse and worse. And, body language, going for loose balls, boxing out, rebounding, all those sorts of hustle, not stats, but hustle plays that you need to make to win college basketball games in the Big 12. Kansas State just didn't come up with enough of those plays. Utah was the more hungry team in this game when at the time K-State was playing for much more as a true bubble team. But now that's out of the question now, guys. Kansas State is not a bubble team anymore. I'm sorry, they're just not.
And Fitz, the one thing that we talked about when we did the GPC live was Coleman Hawkins getting back on track. And I know that I really thought this was going to be a good game for him to get rolling. There wasn't a lot of guys, if you look at Utah on paper, who could go with him one-on-one, but for whatever reason, he just didn't have the game. I think the game looks a lot different if he doesn't get into early foul trouble. I know he wasn't very effective in the beginning part of the game, but that's still a guy that when he is right can impact the game. But Fitz, I got to tell you, I was very concerned with not just his play, but some of the effort that we saw out of Coleman Hawkins at points during that game.
It was strange. It was really weird. If you'd told me after that BYU performance, and he wasn't very good in that game, that he would actually be worse against Utah, I'd said, is that possible? Well, it was. Guys, he looked like at times he wasn't even invested in the game. Like, Big B, you were an athlete, and some of it becomes muscle memory. When you're in a situation, this happens, I just do it. I react that way. He dribbled a ball out to the 3-point line when they needed a 2 to tie. That's something like you watch kids basketball and you learn that. He just looked totally not even disengaged, like he had just forgot how to play basketball for a while. It was truly weird. I can't explain it. I've never seen anything like it. And I think the only thing that went wrong is they kept playing him. Honest to God, I know he made some huge plays down the stretch. He played like 3 really good minutes, and then he had the brain fart where he could have tied the game and instead dribbled it out. But holy cow, this guy is so talented. There is not a weak spot in his game when he plays, when he's invested. There was not a strong point to his game last night. He didn't rebound very well. He certainly didn't defend. He was using his hands and not his body and feet. He just didn't want to shoot for most of the game. And then he just forgot how to pass and do team type things. It was odd. I'm just so confused by that.
When he's supposed to be, I think, a leader of this team, it becomes very obvious that when he plays well, K-State plays really well. I think it's fair to say Doug McDaniel, guys, has turned the corner. Doug McDaniel has turned the corner. He is K-State's best player right now. But, Brian, I'm going to go to you with this because you have said this from day one. In order for K-State to win, they need their best players to be their best players. That's Doug McDaniel, and that's Coleman Hawkins. And so when one of those guys doesn't play like the best player, it becomes very difficult to win basketball games.
Yeah, that was it. Like Fitz said, it was just odd. I mean, you're down 2, you're pressing, you get a steal, you get the ball at 11 feet, and you dribble it out. you would, just like Fitz said, muscle memory. Hey, I got a steal. I'm going to the basket. And I didn't rewatch the game. Gilbert, you said you rewatched the game. Maybe I'm wrong, but I'm not sure there was even anybody in front of him when he got the ball. And I'm like, what are we doing here? But it just seemed odd, but he wasn't invested. He played. Here's the thing. He's not the most physical guy. Fitz said that he doesn't have any holes in his game. I think a lot of times when the game gets physical, sometimes he doesn't. And when he does that, he uses his hands a lot, and he fights and he grabs and he slaps because he does. Maybe I don't even know that it's that he can't be physical. It's almost like sometimes he just doesn't want to be physical. And last night was one of those times he didn't want to be physical. Now, Utah took total advantage of that. I mean, they just bullied K-State. I mean, there's no other way to put it. They literally bullied them. I mean, what they rebounded about 23, something ridiculous. Which in a competitive basketball game, you would have thought K-State got blown out. You know, you get out rebounded by 23. You're thinking, man, they lost by 15 points. That's not what happened. But yeah, I just thought Coleman Hawkins, he just hadn't played the last two games, reverted back to the games that he was playing when K-State had lost 6 in a row. Just kind of lackadaisical, passive. I'm not pinning the blame all on him because it wasn't all his fault, clearly. But I've said it before, Cole, when you're one of the best players, I'm not even saying the leader. When you're one of the best players, you have to play like that, especially on the road. You have to play like that. And when you don't, it's a problem. And K-State, look, we can be honest. K-State's they don't have the most talented basketball team out there. They have guys that can play, but they're not littered with NBA talent. But when they play together, they can beat a lot of basketball teams. But when they don't, it doesn't look good. And last night was one of those times where it just didn't look like when the game got physical, K-State didn't. And that was the problem.
Couple of things, Cole, real quick, before we move on from Hawkins. Number one, Big B and Fitz mentioned that play from Hawkins. You know, Big B, you asked me. No, Coleman Hawkins probably doesn't have an automatic 2 points, but at worst, I think you go up and get at least draw contact, go to the free throw line. Like, it wasn't a clear path to the basket, but dribbling it out to the perimeter was not the smart move there. But that happened with a minute or two left.
Yep.
There wasn't just one. There were a couple times on defense where Coleman Hawkins just didn't even act like he wanted to be there. Didn't even act like it. And Fitz, I didn't even tell you this, Fitz. I recorded most of my film study but before we did this live, and I just completely, I was sweating by the end of a 3 or 4 minute rant with Hawkins on one of his plays at the end. And I actually got done and I shoved it all to the trash. And I'm going to redo it all in the morning, Fitz. I didn't get a lot of sleep. Got back from Salt Lake. I felt like Wally, right? Wally, for tuning in. I channeled my inner Wally and figured I'd let Fitz take the brunt of some of that. But yeah, I try to be fair. I try to find the middle ground. I try to understand maybe that there's two sides to everything. You know, is Hawkins hurt right now? Yes. But if he's so banged up to where he can't give a defensive effort, put somebody on the floor who does give their 100% and put his body on the line for his team.
Yeah. You can't let the record holder for 3-pointers come off of a screen, your guy gets picked off, and you back up. That can't happen. I don't care if the guy goes around you. That's what you want him to do. Make him drive around you. But you're going to tell me you're going to back up to 12 feet and let this guy who's made more 3-pointers in the history of the school get a wide open 3? There's no excuse for that.
And Ethan, I'm going to ask you this because we watched the women's game, which we'll get into. One thing about women's basketball is that free throws, it feels like anyway, free throws are a lot more of an automatic in the women's game than they are in the men's game. It can be an adventure in the men's game. And Utah came into this game shooting just over 65% from the free throw line as a team. The guy who was the worst free throw shooter in the Big 12 conference at 35%. What did he go, guys? 8 for 12 from the free throw line. Absolutely something absurd like that. To me, we can sit here and we can talk about Coleman Hawkins. And we have, let it be known, we have given him his praise. We've given him his flowers. At some point, he's going to rebound. Will it be too late? Maybe. But I have a very strong confidence that he's going to rebound. But let's just call it like it is. It took a generational game by this guy at the free throw line who makes 35% of his free throws. He made 8 of 12, or you can look up the numbers, guys. I don't have the box score in front of me, but he was ridiculous from the free throw line. And Ethan, like, it just felt like, okay, it was just going to be one of those nights if he's making those free throws.
It did. And you also have to worry about the fact how many of them came off second chance points. Out at halftime, I think K-State allowed a 7-0 run, and I think all 7 points were off of second chance points. And I know he had a pair of free throws where he went 1 of 2. It does seem generational, but just one guy making his free throws shouldn't be, oh, this is a dooming night. There was very little effort. K-State didn't get to the free throw line themselves. They didn't attack the rim like Utah did. All around, it just wasn't. It wasn't just because Utah, they made their free throws one night. It was an effort thing. K-State didn't do it. They let Utah get to the rim and get to the free throw line, and Utah just beat them there.
And Ryan, I'm going to ask you this. You brought this up earlier at the start of the show. I think this is probably a good segue into kind of our next topic with this, but you brought up K-State's out of bubble contention. And I know that there was a graphic that had been floated around. If you looked at Joe Lenardi's bracketology, he still has K-State on there, I think, is maybe the next 4 out. I found it interesting because there are some teams that are above K-State that I think are probably going to drop. You look at a team like Georgia, bottom of the barrel SEC team, but because that conference is so good, they get the benefit of the doubt. What does K-State have to do to get back into the bubble right now?
Man, Fitz, are you going to be mad at me if I just say I don't want to answer this question?
I'll answer it.
Because I don't have no interest in entertaining this anymore. The way that Kansas State played over the last 2 games is not deserving of even a conversation about the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, so, I mean, I agree with that. I think if you want to even get into that conversation, if you want to return to the spot where they were last night, they got to win out and probably a game in Kansas City to get to where they were. Because that wasn't just a loss. That wasn't losing to Iowa State or Kansas or Arizona. That was losing to a team that isn't in the NCAA tournament. And so it's a bad one. It's a bad one to have on your resume in your final 10. So you got to make up for it now. And guys, I just don't see them doing it. I think they've forgotten what they were doing. Maybe it was just they were tired. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this week, the long week here where they don't have game, they'll get refreshed and they'll be brand new when they take the court on Sunday. But for me, that didn't look physical. It looked mental. It looked like, well, we're in the conversation now. We can relax. And they just weren't very good. But yeah, I see your point, Gills. It's silly to talk about until probably they string 3 in a row here, maybe 4. And then we can talk about it with Iowa State coming to town.
Brian, I don't necessarily disagree with those two, but I think it's about being in the conversation. If K-State wins their next 2 games, are they at least in the conversation? Can you squint your eyes and start scoreboard watching and hoping that other teams lose in order for you to get back into that? Or are we kind of at a point where it doesn't matter, they can win out and they'll still have to win the Big 12 tournament? How do you kind of break this down?
I don't think they have to win the Big 12 tournament. I talked to Fitz today on Big 12 Insiders, and we were talking Kansas State just for a tidbit. And, there's been several teams. Well, I say several. I think there's been like 11 teams that have had 14 losses that have made the tournament. If that's the case, I don't know how many. And I'm talking about at-large teams. There's been 11 at-large teams that have had 14 losses. Well, you start digging into some of Kansas State's losses, and some of those are going to end up biting the Wichita States, the Utahs, some of the Liberty. I mean, these are going to end up biting K-State in the butt a little bit here, some of these losses that they've had. Now, do they have better wins than they have worse losses? In my opinion, yes. The best win that they have is at Iowa State. I mean, that's the best win that they have. And I would match that up, I'll be honest, with any win that any team in the country has this year outside of maybe Auburn. Other than that, that's one of the best wins in the country. That's why K-State is still being talked about. if anybody's guessing, is why are they still here after what happened this weekend? Why? It's because they have one of the better wins of any school in the country. That has to matter. So can they still make it? Yes. But here's the thing. Fitz talked about, winning out or winning the next 4 and see what happens at Iowa State in one game in Kansas City. I think they got to win. It depends on who you play in Kansas City.
Mm-hmm.
If it's Colorado, that isn't going to matter. You beat Colorado. Okay, great. Who else are you going to beat? And that's where it becomes tricky because you beat Colorado. Okay, great. Then the next game you beat Cincinnati. Okay, great. But you haven't done anything yet. You've beaten 2 teams that nobody's giving credit for. That's why it gets so tricky. I think they got to they got to win out and they got to beat Iowa State. And unless that happens, I'm with Gills. I'm not even entertaining that until I see that happen. If it does, we can have this conversation. But if not, there's no point because they blew it. Let's just be honest. The game, to me, it wasn't even last night. It's the game of BYU. You had an opportunity and you got blown out. If that's a good game, then okay, we can still talk. But you got whipped. And then you got physically whipped at Utah. I just don't want to hear. I mean, Utah almost had as many offensive rebounds as K-State had rebounds. That's embarrassing.
Ethan?
Oh, no, I agree. Sure, you could say they went on 2 long winning streaks in the Big 12, but like you said, you have losses that are inexcusable. Liberty, Wichita State. I mean, the Drake loss isn't bad, but it's still not a good look. You can hype on the win at Iowa State. You beat KU, you beat Arizona, but they just get canceled out by bad losses. It's going to take a lot to get in, and you can't drop another game. Drop another game, it's over.
Yeah, I don't necessarily disagree with any of that, guys. It's kind of funny because I actually had a video pop up on my TikTok today. I feel like Fitz always on TikTok, but I had a video pop up on my TikTok, and it was talking about NC State's run last year, guys. I don't know if you remember the story of NC State. They win their first game in the conference tournament in overtime, and then they run the table, make the NCAA tournament, get all the way to the Final Four. It's a crazy Cinderella run. I'm not going to sit here and say that I think that is a possibility, but I think that when you look at the way K-State went on that 6-game winning streak and who they played, I'm not ready to sit here and doubt them with anything. Like, it really wouldn't surprise me, guys, if they go through and they win 1 game the rest of the season. But it also wouldn't surprise me at all if they go through and win the next however many games they have left in the regular season. And we're sitting here, talking about this team being right back to where they were. I don't know how you guys feel about that, but this team, when they play good, their potential is they can beat the number 6 team in the country on that team's home court. But when they play bad, they can lose to a Wichita State and look awful in the process. So, Ryan, I guess, before we move on here, like, am I crazy for not fully being totally out on this group?
Maybe I should rephrase what I said earlier. Like me and Kellis and Derek, like we were out in Utah together, and like after the BYU loss, it was still like looking at the wins and losses and how things would fit together if they were still alive. 5-2 or 6-1 from here on out. But like it just like our time and our focus, right, and our attention, for me personally, was just spent on breaking down the 2 losses, on rewatching the games and the hustle and the effort and all that stuff. Like that's where I just feel like the whole bubble conversation is secondary to all that right now. This team's losing, right? And to start winning, you have to, stop, making bad plays that are causing you to lose, right? That's where Kansas State needs to focus on right now. The focus should not necessarily be, and this is for inside of that locker room, right? I know Drum 10 treats every game like it's its own season, but right now, the focus should be on stopping the losing streak. And I know it's only 2 games, but it feels like isn't that crazy, guys? This team won 6 games in a row. That feels like a distant memory now over the last 2 games, the way that it's played. But, obviously, of course, if Kansas State gets hot, it's college basketball. Anything can happen. It just seems so unlikely now, whereas 2 games ago, it definitely seemed like something much more tangible.
And Fitz, I'm going to go to you with this because you look at their schedule the next few games, and these are all games that potentially they'll be favored in. You would think they'd be favored over Arizona State at home. There's a chance that they'll be favored against UCF on the road, maybe not. But then they come home against Colorado where they could be a double-digit favorite. It's not crazy to think that this team wins 3 games in a row and people are still interested, right?
Yeah. No, look, Arizona State, you can say this about a lot of teams. I really think Arizona State's better than their record. They got some dudes.
Mm-hmm.
And they gave K-State problems. And then they turned around and almost won at Tech.
Yep.
I mean, they've been playing some decent basketball. So I'm not going to write that off. And certainly going on the road with K-State's record, they won at Iowa State. That looks like a asteroid strike right now. Just a total rarity that you never witness because they lost 15 in a row, Gills, on true road games.
29 in a row for Iowa State at home.
Mm-hmm.
And then they do that, and then they turn around and lose 2 on, lose 2 on the road. They won somewhere else on the road during this time. But anyhow, Arizona State. And like going to Cincinnati is going to be tough. They're playing better basketball.
Mm-hmm.
Just to get to where you need to be for Iowa State is a journey. But let me say this: when they started this process, when they got that first win, they had 13 games left in the regular season. There was a lot of rope out there. Well, we're down to 5 now. There's just 5. There's not any more rope. This is it, guys. And I think you need to win 5 more games in the regular season. Or I don't know. I mean, if you lose to Iowa State, you better win 3 in Kansas City and lose in the championship, or however that works out.
Yep.
So it's a mess. It's a mess. And it all comes down to they lost their identity. They were playing to such a brilliant identity for 6 games. It was so effective, and they just stopped. They stopped taking the ball off the rim and running. They didn't compete for rebounds. They haven't been defending it at the right level. They're not taking the same shots. They're taking more of those just pass the ball around the outside 3-pointers. They've just totally gotten away from everything they've done. And maybe it was coaching. Maybe there's this brilliant water in Utah that feeds the brains of basketball coaches that shut down K-State where no one else could be shutting them down. I don't know, but they better find themselves real quick.
Brian, can they turn this thing around?
I mean, Gil said it. It's college basketball. Anything can happen. So sure, they can turn it around. Is it? And I don't even think it's a question of whether it's likely or not. They just have to get back to what Fitz said, playing the brand of basketball that got them into all these conversations. Go back to doing that, playing physical, getting the ball out and running. K-State's not good in the half court. They haven't been good in the half court all year. Well, what you do, you get the ball up the court, you get it moving side to side, and then you get open shots before a defense can really just get set and settled. That's what they've been doing, and they didn't do that the last couple of games. Been a lot of ISO ball that I've noticed, and I'm like, K-State doesn't have the ISO type of guys on their basketball team. It's got to go side to side. You got to get the ball moving. They haven't done that, and it cost them. And they haven't played physical. They haven't played. I know I keep coming back to that. I'm the same guy. Physical in football, physical in basketball. I scream it, but it's just the truth. Games are won with physicality. That's sports, at least these sports. And you got to be physical. And when you're not, and another team is, more times than not, you're going to get beat if you don't do something extraordinary. And they did in the last 2 games. But yes, they can get it back, man. Just get back to doing what you were doing. Just go. I think what Fitz is saying or said earlier about the break, I think it's going to be huge. I think it will be huge. And we will know before the first media timeout, we'll know whether K-State is thrown in the towel or if they are saying, you know what, we're going to stand up and fight. Literally, by the first media timeout, we'll know. And it's not going to be whether they miss a bunch of shots, because sometimes you just miss shots. But we'll know by how they're playing whether they've thrown in the towel or, you know what, I'm going to stand up and see and take this thing to the wire. I'm very interested to see with that, because Fitz mentioned coaching. Well, that'll be all about coaching at that point.
And our friend K-Ned, who last week gave us a super chat, I don't think we got to that. So want to make sure that K-Ned give you a shout out. I think this is a great point. He said maybe other coaches started paying more attention to the adjustments, and now it's time to add a layer. If you're going to add a layer, this is the time to do it. And we'll see what happens. It's going to be interesting. Guys, I'd like to give you an update. Thanks to our friend DeGary Cleveland in the chat. BYU currently up 22-7 over KU.
Is KU wearing those uniforms tonight?
They are not wearing
just
those
the women are at home.
Yeah.
Okay, so the ones they showed are for the next home game?
Yeah.
Well, I know K-State hasn't been playing great basketball, but they don't have to play in those uniforms. And I think that's a win for the entire K-State nation. Those are the ugliest damn things I've ever seen. Sorry, Cole, I just kidnapped the show. Those uniforms are the worst things ever designed. Remember when they had the what's that print called? Like pajama print. What that camouflage print?
With the bright colors.
Yeah, they had those. Adidas came up with those. Those are bad. What is it called? Zumba? No, that's not right. Anyhow, back to the show. Cole Carmody is your host tonight.
Thank you. Now that we've officially talked this topic into the ground and somehow it ended up at KU, this is a great segue to actually talk about the University of Kansas, because they will be visiting Manhattan on Saturday to take on the Kansas State women's team. Unfortunately, we have to talk about Monday before we talk about Saturday, Ethan, but 70-57, K-State falls in Morgantown. A very disappointing game. I think if K-State wins that game, they are feeling very good about winning the Big 12 championship, but now they need some help. And I don't know about you, but to me, the thing that stood out in that game is West Virginia just played really, really good.
Yeah, and it's hard for any team to go into West Virginia and even come close to winning. I don't think West Virginia has had a game in single digits at home this year, and they're undefeated. Throw that in with you had a 45-hour turnaround to get from Manhattan, Kansas to Morgantown and prepare to play. It hurt, but this K-State team is mature enough and experienced enough to know how to deal with West Virginia. It just felt like no one stepped up to the plate to take control, whereas J.J. Quinterly for West Virginia went off. She shot almost 35% of their shots. And she just took control, and K-State just had no answer.
Brian, K-State, the return of Aoka Lee we're expecting to happen on Saturday. We've talked about her importance to the team on this show, but the fact that you get your star back, I mean, coaching aside, because we'll get into that aspect of it. I know you have some thoughts on that, but this team, I feel like, is going to be able to learn from these losses that they had. And if they can take any kind of lessons from them now that they get their star back, it should pay them dividends down the road.
Well, here's the thing. They got beat the other night because West Virginia was just ultra aggressive and took K-State out of everything that they were trying to get accomplished. I mean, you could see it. They weren't steady handling the basketball. They weren't comfortable against the press. You saw them dribbling slow to go back and forth as far as getting the ball up the court. It did not look good. And look, this could be the Achilles heel of what Kansas State has to deal with, because teams are going to see that and say, you know what? If we pressure their guards, how good can they be? Even when they get Lee back, how good can they be if you just pressure the guards out front? Now, another thing that happened, K-State didn't make any shots, and it's make or miss. And it wasn't, don't get me wrong, West Virginia was pressing them, and the problem is they were rushing shots, but they got a lot of open shots too that they just missed, that they just flat out missed. And those are shots that usually go in. So who knows what the game looks like. I texted you guys at the time. I thought there were some coaching lapses. I'm like, you're down 13. You let it go from 13 to 15 to 17 to 19. You don't call a timeout. You just took those 2 timeouts home with you. I'm like, what are you doing? Call a timeout. Stop the momentum. Do something. And he just sat there on the scorer's bench. I'm like, okay, well, I guess we've decided that we can't win this game, because that's literally what it looked like. I was upset by that because the ladies needed some help, and it didn't look like they got the help. But they'll learn. They'll learn. They just got to be stronger with the ball, because teams will attack them now. They'll see that. They'll get be stronger with the ball, and the shots will go. I mean, you're not going to make all of them. It never happens that way. They made a ton of them the game before, and this one they just didn't. So things tend to turn around when it comes to shot making.
And Fitz, they have announced that there is no longer any GA tickets available for this game on Saturday. It is senior night for the Kansas State women, so we expect this to be at least Aoka Lee's last regular season game. So we will find out. Are you shaking your head? Am I wrong? It's not senior night?
We have another home game.
Yeah.
Okay. So
It's
not
Baylor.
senior night.
Yeah,
That
they're
is
doing it. They're doing it on the weekend so families can come. But
It is
there is
senior night.
another
It
home
is.
game on Monday.
Another home
Yes.
game. Okay. Well, it sounds like to me that they fully expect to be one of those top 16 seeds, which we'll get into. But Fitz, this fan base has fully supported the women's basketball team this year. And I think the evidence of that is the fact that there are no GA tickets left. It's been pretty impressive to see how this fan base has supported these ladies this year.
It's just great family entertainment. I mean, it really is. Those GA tickets, you can take your family of 4, 6, 8 if you're future Ryan Gilbert. I don't know why I think he's going to have a lot of kids. I just think he will, because he feels like he's duplicating himself. Anyhow,
Came back from Salt Lake without a wife. So
I'm
yeah,
really disappointed in
there.
you. You had one goal. One goal. Look, it's really cool. And I'm like, senior night's the last game. What are you
Right.
doing? But I think Aoka Lee is at the level where you move the damn thing for her so more people can be there. I really believe that. She has been an incredible player. She will go down in K-State history. Hell, they might as well put her number up in the rafters right now. They might as well do it on Saturday, because that's where she belongs and everyone knows it. There's no doubt. I mean, so I think it's kind of cool. I do. What wasn't cool was, for once, I planned my day around watching Kansas State women's basketball, and they play like poop. My fault. It's my fault. So I will not be paying much attention Saturday. I'll peek in once in a while. I'll follow Ethan's X account because he tweets. Doesn't make sense. You tweet off X. I think they should call them exclamations on X there. And I'll just follow it that way and peek in once in a while, because every time I do watch, they start playing bad. What?
And on the GoPowercat VIP message boards, where Ethan is also sharing his thoughts as well.
Yes. Good point. I don't know that she's been so amazing. I'm glad. I hope she actually does get to play, and she has been practicing. So,
Yes.
If anything, even if she's not ready to go, they'll put her in at the start of the game. I'm confident of that.
So, Ethan, what does this team need to do to secure a top 16 seed? Because I think it's pretty simple right now what they need to do for winning the Big 12. They have to win out, and they need TCU to lose a game. That is the situation that K-State's dealing with. Now, you look at TCU's schedule, it's not crazy to think that they would lose at least one more game, because they still have Baylor on that schedule, and they still have West Virginia on that schedule, two of the better teams in the conference.
Yep.
So that's definitely not out of the question. But for K-State, you got to take care of your own house. And so what does K-State need to do in order to make sure that they do potentially get those 2 more home games in Bramlage come March?
Went out. Today the coaches poll came out because it comes out on a Tuesday. K-State was 15. Now, of course, the coaches poll isn't the committee's final ranking, but that would put them as the second to last 4 seed, which is what they were last year, I believe. Went out. You have Aoka Lee back. You play arguably your hardest remaining game against Baylor at home in front of what will probably be another big crowd on national TV on a Monday night. In the Big 12, it's probably going to come down to that very last game. K-State goes to Iowa State. TCU will be at Baylor to finish the year. You're probably going to need multiple TVs at the end of the season to figure out who wins the whole damn thing. Utah's somehow in it. West Virginia's in it. Baylor's in it. There's a lot that's going to have to be solved before then. But for K-State, you have Aoka Lee back. Just win your last 3 games, and then you can go into the Big 12 tournament and prove, hey, we didn't have Aoka Lee for 8.5 games out of our 18-game conference schedule. Go into the Big 12 tournament and be like, hey, we have her back now, and we're just going to beat everybody. I mean, that's how you if you win out and win the Big 12 tournament, K-State could get on that 2 line.
I think that if they were to find a way on a 2 line, that would really help. I'll say this. I think that the women's game this year is so spread out. There's so much parity in the game. I couldn't tell you who the best team in the country is right now. A lot of people think UCLA or USC, but both of those teams have tripped up. Ohio State is highly regarded. They almost lost at home to Iowa, and this is not the Caitlin Clark's Iowa team. So there's so much parity in women's college basketball right now. And Ryan, I'll go to you before we move on to our next topic. How much did K-State fans need this? How much do they need this K-State women's team to have some success, to just, as a fan base, kind of rally around this team?
Yeah, it's been, ever since, I guess, really that, football winning the Big 12 and K-State going to the Elite Eight, there just hasn't been enough to really cheer for. I know 8-win football, we've debated that here. That's great. But, I'm sure fans, Big B, you mentioned it, fans want more, and that's okay to want more. They're hungry. And obviously, if you are a fan of Kansas State basketball and football, you should be a fan of the women's basketball team as well. So, yeah, if you get to host, you got a very real advantage in the NCAA tournament playing at home in the first couple of games.
I think the goal for this team needs to be to move on to the Sweet 16.
Here, I got one last thing I want to say about Aoka.
Go right ahead.
So we talked about Aoka. She's already in the Raptors, ironically, for her 61-point game against Oklahoma.
True.
I will always point to that game and say why she's the greatest women's basketball player to play at K-State. She did that as a sophomore against a ranked Oklahoma team, all in regulation. That is mind-blowing. Aoka Lee also owns almost every career statistic outside of assists, points, rebounds, blocks, double-doubles. And she hasn't played that many more games. She only became the all-time leader of played games in K-State women's basketball history right before she got hurt. She's unbelievable, and it should take, honestly, they should probably just put her in the Raptors again on Saturday. She's an incredible player, and there's not going to be, you might never see anyone like her again at K-State.
It's pretty impressive.
Yep.
Guys, as we move on here, Kansas State wrapped up its coaching staff for the 2025 season. I don't believe we've had a conversation about Connor Riley heading to the NFL, but he did. If you've been living under a rock, Connor Riley is now the offensive line coach for the Dallas Cowboys. Brian LePack has moved from tight ends coach to offensive line coach. And on Monday, Kansas State made the hiring of Luke Wells official. Matt Wells' brother will come to Kansas State and coach tight ends. Drew Little, a former Kansas State offensive lineman, will be an assistant offensive line coach. Brian, I'm going to go to you with this because the trenches are your forte. Give me your thoughts on Brian LePack and hiring of Luke Wells and all things Kansas State offensive line.
Well, here's what I would say. I mean, he obviously worked with the tight ends, so that's about as close to the offensive line as you're going to get on a position group per se. If he's the guy for the job and he was the best candidate, I'm all for it. So that was what I said all along. Kansas State can't afford, this is too important of a season, it's too important of a position to just say, well, we're going to hire the guy because we're familiar with him. Go hire the best guy. So I trust that they hired the best guy for what they needed, that they could get anyway, because you can want to hire the best guy, but if you can't get them, it is what it is. So I feel like and trust that that's what they did. Because offensive line, like I mentioned, this is a real big year for Kansas State. A lot of people have been saying, well, we're building up to 2025. We're building up for it. Well, if you are, great. Offensive line needs to play better than what it played in 2024. That part I know for an absolute fact. And if it doesn't, then people are going to start to question this hire. Now, maybe it's we don't have the same type of players, but all I know is going into the season last year, and people can go back, everybody kept talking about how good it was going to be. And I said, it's not really easy just replacing really good offensive linemen. And as we saw throughout the season, as people started to figure out K-State, it was, we're not going to let you run the ball in between the tackles. We're going to make you do something different. And K-State didn't really adjust to that all that well. So hopefully we can figure some things out, have better blocking schemes when it comes to outside zone, and be able to be a more well-rounded offensive line than versus just, hey, we got a guy, we're going to run it in between the tackles, and that's what we're going to do until you stop it. And if you do, then we're going to have trouble. Because I feel like that's what happened with K-State last year, is that when teams just said, you're not running it between the tackles, K-State offense struggled.
And Fitz, we talked about this a little bit when we on some of our podcasts we did with the hirings of the coaches. But I go back to Brian LePack and his success with the tight ends. Well, Brian, you just mentioned it. It's part of the offensive line, and so just because Brian LePack is the offensive line coach, that doesn't mean that he's not going to work with the tight ends either. And so I think that it's a very natural transition. I'm fired up about Brian LePack moving to the offensive line because I think it's really, really going to help. It brings a fresh perspective. And, talking about Luke Wells, Fitz, he is obviously the brother of Matt, but we talked about this. You cannot be more loyal to your boss than if they are literally your brother.
Luke, I am your brother. Gills, that was a movie reference.
Okay. Star Wars.
Yes, thank you. Look, I think there was a big emphasis here with not disrupting what they've got going. Bringing in an outside ingredient. But I also think LePack had earned this opportunity. He is an offensive line guy. He'd been coaching the tight ends. There's no doubt he did an incredible job with the tight ends because not only were they good receiving tight ends, but sometimes that doesn't pair up very well with good blocking tight ends. You quite often pick one or the other. And I think K-State does both pretty well. And I think that goes to coaching because we're now seeing it over 4, 5, 6 different players. So, you move them inside. You got, believe me, a head coach, particularly a defensive head coach, you got to trust your offensive coordinator, but boy, you got to put a lot of faith in your offensive line coach. I mean, if he screws it up, you can work around everything else. But if the offensive line coach doesn't get his job done, you're losing football games. And I think LePack gives you a great opportunity to continue that. There was a great connection between Connor Riley and his offensive line, but also a lot of those guys are cycling through and we're getting some new ones. So maybe that's not as important. I like bringing in Luke Wells because he's experienced coach. He won't disrupt anything because he's been around these guys a little bit. And also he's actually a tight end coach. He's not another position looking to move out of tight end to go somewhere else, which a lot of tight end coaches are. He's actually a tight end coach. And he's looked for that. He's recruited that. He's been a successful recruiter on top of everything. He's connected to Oklahoma and other places. I think they helped themselves as best possible by losing one of the best offensive line coaches in college football. But as Big B said, let's see how this goes. All right. We can talk hypothetically that this guy's a great coach at this position. Let's get into the season and then we can discuss.
And Gilbert, I'm going to throw this to you because you are a fan, and so is Brian, but we'll get his opinion later. But you're a fan of the Pittsburgh Steelers, and I know you know this stat. Either one of you guys, how many head coaches have the Pittsburgh Steelers had in their organization's history?
Well, what you're thinking of is 3 in the last 70 years?
3 in the last 70 years. Yes, exactly. Which means
Big B.
The continuity on the staff has been there, right? It's been there. And so they know what's going on. To me, Ryan, this feels like literally, okay, we'll hire Luke Wells. He'll fit right in. He knows what's going on. Brian LePack, you've seen what's going on with the offensive lineman. You'll fit right in. You know what's going on. I feel like there could be some parallels to healthy programs, healthy organizations, and really what K-State is building.
Yeah, I see. What you're getting at is the floor is very high, right? And I know Big B can probably speak to this a tad bit better than me, that some are frustrated that that ceiling hasn't been higher, but the floor, right? It's consistent. If it's not broken, don't fix it, right? And you've got a young quarterback and Lincoln Cure's coming and you're going after 5-star tight ends still. And, offensively, you don't want to disrupt something that is building, right? If Avery Johnson leaves and you've got a bunch of turnover in terms of your roster, I think you could maybe look at shaking things up. But yeah, I like what Fitz said. Don't do anything to disrupt the offense if you don't have to.
Brian, I want to ask you this too, because this is kind of something that we've floated the idea about, but the tight ends are going to work with the offensive linemen more times than they're not going to work with the offensive linemen. And so am I crazy for thinking that there's going to be some overlap between the offensive line coach and the tight end coach? Like, those guys got to be able to work together.
I mean, for sure. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say they work with them on an individual skills basis on a day-to-day stuff, but I mean, when you're doing combination block drills, tight ends and tackles are 100% working together. So yeah, you're going to get some of that. I'm not going to say they're going to be in the same meeting or anything like that, but they could be. But I just don't think that'll happen. But yeah, they're going to work together because again, a tight end is an extension of the offensive line. Now, depending on how you want to use them, K-State runs the football. Tight ends got to block. It's just no ifs, ands, or buts about that. They have to be able to block. So, yeah, they're going to have some overlap there. But on a day-to-day maybe meeting group, there maybe not. But like I said, they have to work in tandem because they're an extension of the line. So, yes, it's going to work. Or should I say they've worked together? Not necessarily it's going to work because we don't know that. But, yes, there should be some overlap. Fitz said it, continuity, not bringing somebody else in from the outside, that they felt strongly about that. And if they feel strongly about that, you got to trust that they know, hey, these guys are going to be able to do what we're asking them to do based on the type of offense that we're going to run. And that makes all the difference is, hey, this is the kind of offense that we're going to run. So who should be the best offensive line coach? Oh, okay. Well, the tight end coach understands what I want to do. Obviously, he can move to be the offensive line guy because he was an offensive line person, had coached him before. So I like it. And like I said, we're going to see if it works. We can't just say it. Fitz is right. But if it does, we'll make it work. I don't disagree with it.
There's a lot of Ethan. I'm gonna go to you with this one. There's a lot of folks on our GoPowercat message boards who have maybe questioned the promoting Matt Wells, hiring Luke Wells, putting Brian LePack in positions. But I always go back to this: Chris Kleiman has a plan. This isn't just something that he has picked names out of a hat and said, "You're going to do this. You're going to do this. You're going to do this." I think that, and Ethan, you see this on our message board just as much as anybody. I think fans, it's short for fanatic, just like Brian always says. There is always going to be a tendency to overreact, but we got to let it play out. But I feel like all of these hires, they're just very safe. And sometimes that can rub people the wrong way. But I think in this instance, I think that these hires are correct.
I think people just see it as also, it could just be a lazy out. You didn't go try to find the next big coordinator. You just took the guy below him and gave him. But like you said, Kleiman knows what he wants to do, and he knows that these coaches know what he wants to do. So it makes perfect sense to just keep the same guys you have and promote them up. I mean, it's also a good look. People notice that you're willing to take your tight ends coach and give him the offensive line, and then it's a good look, but it's also just not. I don't like the idea that people think it might be lazy and they're not really trying to find someone else. Why would you bring in another factor when you don't need to? You know what these coaches bring. You know what they're capable of. You don't need to bring in another outside source to maybe mix things up and throw in new schemes that weren't there before that you have to try to figure out. I think it's a great idea to just keep, as long as it's working, keep hiring from within.
And the old barn cat with great comment here. He says, "Me a fanatic, darn right I am." The old barn cat, you are not alone, my friend. Guys, before we wrap this thing up, I would be remiss if I didn't at least mention Kansas State baseball. Right now, they are currently 1-4. Started off the season down there against Coastal Carolina, 2 games against Coastal Carolina, 1 game against St. Joseph, and 1 game against Washington. Today, they just went on the road for a true road game against number 6 team in the country, North Carolina. Lost that game 12-9. Has not been a very hot start for the Batcats, but I'm going to go to you, Gilbert, because non-conference for basketball and non-conference for baseball are completely different. So we talked about bad losses and how that hurts a resume. Guess what? In baseball, you can lose and it can be okay. So I'm going to ask you this. What lessons can you learn? Because, again, there are no such thing as moral victories in sports. I tweeted this out. But you can learn lessons from playing good teams. K-State in basketball, they didn't play very many good teams in the non-conference. And it's coming back to bite them. So I think you can agree with me on this, that when you play good teams and you lose, it's a little easier than when you play bad teams and you lose.
As long as you learn from those losses, right? As long as you learn and you get better, and it doesn't take a long time, like with hoops, right? Of course, Kansas State basketball got better, just took too long. Kansas State baseball's got to learn that, yeah, you can learn from them, but you've got to grow rather quickly.
And part of this too, guys, is the RPI factor. And for folks maybe who aren't familiar, with the RPI system in college baseball, essentially you don't get penalized for playing the best teams. You get penalized for playing bad teams. But if you play the best teams and you lose, those losses, they don't hurt you. But if you play a bad team and lose, those losses really hurt you. And in some cases, even beating bad teams hurts you with your RPI. And so, like I told folks on our message boards, K-State has a real opportunity to be 1-9. They can start off the season 1-9. But say I'm not picking on KU. They just played Texas A&M Corpus Christi. If they played KU's schedule and they went 6-3 versus 1-8, you'd almost rather be 1-8 based off of how the RPI works. And it's crazy how the sport works. That's just how it is. And Fitz, the last thing we'll say on this topic before we wrap it up, K-State needs to find a way, and college baseball needs to find a way to make it more of an even playing field. It's very apparent that the northern schools have a major disadvantage. I noticed that watching the game today, but K-State doesn't have a home game until March, and even then there might be snow on the ground. College baseball has to fix this.
And it never happened because the southern schools, the SEC, has dominance, and they're not going to do anything to give that up. We're seeing it played out in all sports now. They've been doing this in baseball. They've been a blockade to moving the season back more. And I just tweeted this out. I'm a believer that basketball shouldn't start till January 1, when we should have May Madness. Baseball should be moved back so that we end up playing in Omaha over the 4th of July weekend. I think that makes a lot of sense. Why is K-State stinking right now? Well, a big part of it is they've barely been outside to hit. They just haven't been able to get out of their barn, which is, they're basically where they practice when they have to be inside. And so it's going to take them a while. But today they were actually competitive. They played North Carolina pretty well. So maybe that's just one of those days where you were better than others, or maybe they've already learned some lessons.
And as we wrap this up, we've got a super chat from K-Ned. We appreciate you. He says you have limited AJ. You have AJ Avery Johnson for a limited time. No big changes now. Big B, there isn't a lot of big changes in K-State football, but as we've already kind of talked about, that might not necessarily be a bad thing.
Nope, not a bad thing at all. At least it appears not to be a bad thing. Keeping continuity is important when you can do it. As long as it's competent, it is never a bad thing to keep guys in-house. I know people want to make change just for the sake of making change, but when you've got certain pieces in place, and Kansas State doesn't make sense to just go outside just to say, well, let's go hire a different guy. Yeah, you want to hire the best guy, but if you've got the best guy in-house, then you do it.
And Fitz, I'm going to let you push the buttons as we wrap this thing up. We would like to give a score update for the people who are watching this and not the absolute murder that's taking place on ESPN right now. BYU currently holds a 43-26 lead over the University of Kansas. So there's a real chance that BYU beats KU worse than they beat Kansas State, which I don't even think I thought would have been possible.
Yeah, if you thought K-State had a bad trip to Utah, this is going really awful for KU. They look totally uninterested in this game. Cole, thank you for sitting in as host. My little brain didn't want to do it tonight, and you took over on a short notice and did a great job. E, thanks for joining us. Great stuff. Mr. Big B, I'll talk to you tomorrow. And Ryan Gilbert, get some sleep, man. Welcome back. Welcome back to Kansas. I arranged the weather just for you. Appreciate everyone watching.
Thank you for watching the K-State Insiders. This has been a GoPowercat.com and Spirit Street production.